Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here and to be invited to speak for you with all these super interesting speeches that have been published. My name is Hedvig, Hogfors, by the way. Okay. In Sweden, we are about to implement marine green infrastructure in the management, and I will give a short presentation about the Mosaic framework, which is a tool to support this management. And the title of my presentation is The Principle of Mosaic Tool, how is it used in practice in adaptation to changing environment, and how it can be used to support blue growth. Well, Mosaic is a framework for identifying marine nature values in viable and ecological representative networks. And the aim is to support a functional, ecosystem-based and adaptive spatial management with a focus on marine green infrastructure, but also marine protected areas and to some extent marine spatial planning. And it's a lot of buzzwords in these lines, but when we started to work and draw the structure of the framework, we put up some targets that we wanted to achieve to reach these goals. I will bring up these targets along my presentation. So before I start to talk about Mosaic, I would like to mention a concept and how we use it, and it's ecosystem components. And in the Mosaic framework, we have focused on biotic ecosystem components. In other words, species, habitats, biotopes, and group of organisms that could be linked to a physical place. And with abiotic ecosystem components, we mean that they are specified with abiotic features like depth, substrate, like sandbanks, for instance. So even if sandbanks could have biota on them, the definition of them are abiotic. And why we focus on biotic is because they are the one carrying the nature values, and they are the one that's sensitive to different human pressures. They need to be able to be linked to a physical place, and it's because we are working with spatial management. So we need to. It's not blue mussels in the whole Baltic Sea that we talk about. We need to specify: is it the occurrence of one single mussel, or is it occurrence of a mussel bed that we refer to? And to give you some example of ecosystem components, it could be eelgrass meadows that's specified with they need to be at least 25% coverage, wintering areas of long-tailed ducks in high concentration, cod spawning ground, biotopes of stoneworts, or single occurrences of Cara horrida, a brackish species that is near threatened. Okay, so now to the structure of Mosaic. Mosaic is divided into two parts, one preparatory part and one main part. And in the preparatory part, groups of experts will give recommendations. They will also do a preparatory nature value assessment. And this is to be used later on for further analysis. And this preparatory nature value assessment is not site-specific, which usually nature value assessment is. But this one is done on ecosystem components and which values they in general contribute with. So which values in general do a bladder wrack contribute to? Do it contribute with high biodiversity relatively to other ecosystem components within the area, and so on. I will get back to this. Moreover, in the preparatory part, it's included sensitivity matrices with the information on how sensitive different ecosystem components are to different human activities or pressures. So this is that part. The main part, here we will identify core areas of nature values and also these core areas that belong to an ecological coherent network. And to do that, we identify where we have high nature values in the seascape, which sites that are important for connectivity, both local perspective to global perspective, and we look at which sites that are adequate and viable, and moreover, which areas do we need to get an ecological representative network in here. So the main part is site-specific. Now we are talking about the real world and not hypothetical ecosystem components. This is done by assessments in field and with seascape analysis. And as I said, Mosaic is a framework that we are developing at the moment. Some parts we have come a long way, and other parts we haven't started with. It's just the framework for it. So I will discuss some of the targets that we put up for the framework. And they should be adaptive and easy to revise, to be able to follow the changes in the environment, both the natural variation over time, but also the human-induced. It also needs to be easy to revise because we know very little about our oceans still. We need to be able to incorporate new knowledge. We very seldom know exactly what is the limiting factor for a species or something. Is it the food in a certain stage, or what is it? So we need to be able to revise, to take in new knowledge. Moreover, it needs to be transparent and comparable and reduce subjectivity and be nationally harmonized. So that if we need to prioritize, or when we need to prioritize, which areas that we should use for either conservation biology or for some human activity or both, we need to be able to compare different nature value assessments. In history, it's been a lot that one person are doing one nature value assessment at one site and are interested in some kind of organism, and another person doing another inventory and are interested in something else. It's hard to do prioritization between these two sites. Moreover, we want it to be based on established international criteria, and these targets that I put out now is pretty square, but to be ecosystem based, we also need to capture the variety of nature in space. We need to be able to capture details, unpredictable details in space, the variation in space. So we need to be open for details that we didn't foresee, that's site-specific. And we also need to be able to include in-depth seascape analysis that we haven't foreseen. So this was the targets, quite many. Now I will start to talk about this preparatory nature value assessment, because this is maybe the ones that sticks out for this framework compared to others. And that is one key to find high nature values out in the field. So the starting point when we work with that preparatory nature value assessment are the sea areas, Bothnia Bay, Bothnia Sea, Baltic proper, and Kattegat and Skagerrak. And now I will use the Baltic proper as an example. So in the preparatory nature value assessment, in step 1, ecosystem components are assessed which nature values they in general bring to a site within the Baltic proper. As I said, do bladder wrack biotopes in general, do they bring high or low biodiversity relatively compared to other ecosystem components within the area? Does pike spawning areas bring any ecosystem services in general? Does and as I said, we need to be able to link this to a physical place, even if we are talking about hypothetical place. So we are not doing an assessment of the value of blue mussels for the whole Baltic proper. We are doing an assessment of what are the values where we have blue mussel at one site. And in step 2, the assessment in step 1 is locally adjusted if the value different in different areas. So sometimes a value of one ecosystem component is higher in the south of a sea area than in the north, or in an inner side of an archipelago or in the outer side. So we can adjust this a bit, but the main assessment is done in step 1. Okay, and the assessment is done using a scoring system by a group of experts that do it. So for each ecosystem component and for each criteria, a point is given. And I will not go through it in details, I don't have time for that. But there are detailed descriptions for how each criterion is to be assessed. And the assessments are reported systematical, and it's like sub-assessment. For each criteria, there are several sub-assessments to do. And this framework, we still haven't get out the first version of this framework, but I heard during lunch that some here in Finland already use this part. And I was very glad to hear that they came to the same conclusion and evaluation after using this as we did, or very similar. So it feels quite robust. But let's see. And it's important that we try as far as possible support it by scientific studies. However, we need to do this assessment on the best knowledge we have today. Because if we don't do any assessment, we will forget about some ecosystem components and just say, yeah, we are not that interested in them, or we don't know much about them. But we need to try, because we are doing management, and we need to then not forget stuff. So we need to try to do our best. And since this is having a management cycle, the assessment will be revised after a couple of years. Okay, so the preparatory nature value put on score on each ecosystem components to be used for later analysis. And this is done both so it's easy to revise. We have 1 point for one ecosystem component and one criteria, for instance, and it's easy to change it. For instance, if one species goes from not threatened to threatened, we can go and change the score for that. Easy in this. It's also easy to compare which are the ecosystem components that got the higher scores compared to the ones that got the lower scores, because since it's hard to collect all the knowledge we have on the ocean, we need it to be transparent so that we can have a good discussion among experts if this is correct or not. The purpose then is, one purpose is to systematically gather knowledge about nature values that different ecosystem components are contributing with, is also to give some support when we need to do, now we need to prioritize different ecosystem components to map. It's also a good support when we do real nature value assessments out in the field at one site. But the main purpose to do this is that these scores can be used for analysis to where in the seascape the nature values are aggregated. So this will come to a later analysis where we can see this. So to discuss that, I would now focus more on how we identify high nature values out in field, or in a map at least, where the preparatory nature value assessment is one key to do that. And here's the flow chart, but I will show it in a more simple way. So above in blue there is the, first I want to point out this circle, that we have this management circle going around. So in every 6 years we will redo everything. But above in blue there is the preparatory part, where we had the recommendations from the experts, which also did the preparatory nature value assessment, where we got the scores for the different ecosystem components. And it also includes these sensitivity matrices that have information how sensitive different ecosystem components are to different human activities and pressures. All the columns are within the main part of Mosaic, and to the left in green is where the field data is. And here is where we identify the core areas of nature values. And here is where we identify which one of these core areas that together makes an ecological coherent network of core areas. And there's 3 different ways to go from field data towards identification of core areas of nature values. So to give a glimpse on this, I will zoom into this part. Depending on which way you go is what kind of available data you have. So I begin from the bottom. If you have, or if you do, detailed field services for nature value assessment, you can directly do a individual and site-specific nature value assessment, and then you do not use this preparatory nature value assessment. Another way is that you have information on the presence of different ecosystem components. So you don't have as many details, like in the first way. Maybe you counted every individual for each species that you see. While here, maybe you know you have a biotope, you have some birds, you know a bit, but you don't know all the details. Then you can use the preparatory nature value assessment and the scores and do like this. So you, for every site, you weight together the present ecosystem component and the scores that they got. You don't sum them up, but I will not go into details how you do it. You can't sum them up, but this is technical stuff. So if somebody wants to talk with me about this, we can talk later. But this map shows also another thing. It's only the black dots that are the sites where we have been checking what we have. And it shows that we know very little about the area around these spots. And that goes for both this way and the first way, where we had the detailed field service. And the third way is also using the presence of ecosystem components. But if we have many field points for it and of a certain quality, they can be used together with environmental data to be modeled to a spatial distribution map. So this is over blue mussels, this is an example. And as you can see here, where we also have environmental data like substrate, salinity, substrate, etc., or wave exposure, you get a much better view. It's exactly the same data of blue mussels that Bill is doing. So you get a better insight how it looked like. And if you have several of these spatial distribution maps, you can use the preparatory nature value assessment, the scores, and make general nature value maps so that you can see where in the seascape you have aggregation of nature values. If you want core areas from these maps, you can, for instance, cut out the areas with the highest scores, like this. Here is also, unfortunately, I don't have time to go into details how you do these maps. You can't, but in every point, you weight together the scores that you from the present ecosystem components. And as you can see, we here have the two different nature value assessments. We have one that is individual and site-specific. We do it on one site. What do we have here? And we have another who do it on ecosystem components. And I will give a short comparison between the two. The preparatory, the aim of that one is to be adaptive and easy to revise, to follow the changes in nature over time, and also to be transparent. We have the scores that we easily can compare between each other. And also we try to have a group of experts doing this, so it's getting less subjective. While the aim of the site-specific, the individual site-specific, is to capture the details of nature's spatial variation. So if the focus of the preparatory nature value assessment is to follow nature's variation over time, the focus of the site-specific is to follow or to capture nature's variation in space. And these maps, if you need to revise up to 6 years and you notice a ecosystem component become super, imagine suddenly blue mussel get down a lot. We have so much fewer. The value of them maybe would rise then. Then these maps will very quickly be made, because we only change the scores under it, and we can have it again and see how the nature values have perhaps changed in the seascape, and where we need to prioritize our management. Okay, and the method, as I said, in the preparatory we have a big group of experts using a scoring system, and it's done on ecosystem components instead. And the other one, we have the guideline is not yet set for this, so I can't really say, but there is more, maybe one or a few persons doing it, and it's site-specific and in the field checking. The criteria used for both of them are the EBSA criteria, which is CBD's criteria, so they are international and very used. The criteria for the preparatory nature value assessments need to be functional on these general assessments, and also we pick the ones we think is most important. While we can use all the EBSA criteria in the site-specific one. We also added criteria for ecosystem services for both of them. Okay, so this is how it can look like. We have this general nature value map. We can take out the areas where in the seascape nature value is gathered, and we can add where we have the known valuable sites, where we have maybe done very detailed research. Okay, so now to the, I don't have any time here, there, okay. So now I will shortly speak about the criteria for ecological and coherent network of core areas, which also is based on CBD criteria, but CBD use it for protected areas, while in Mosaic we have a wider field where we look at any area and see it. So the criteria is they should be high nature values. In other words, it should be aggregation of core areas. The connectivity, the adequate and viable sites, and the ecological representativity. So the networks need to rely on these. And since we are not working with only working with protected areas, when we do the assessment of adequate and viable sites, most of the times this is assessed by looking at the size and the protection of the protected area. So it's administrative thing in many cases. Here we focus more on if the areas are subjected to pressures or not that disturbs them. So we use these sensitivity matrices. And to do this analysis, you need sensitivity matrices, you need the spatial distribution maps of different ecosystem components, and you need maps over human activities, different human activity, the pressures. And the analyses you do are analysis of sensitivities, giving maps over areas known to be sensitive to a certain human pressure, which is very good for marine spatial planning to know which areas that are sensitive to different kind of activities. However, I want to note that we do maps over areas known to be sensitive, but we do not maps over areas we know that are not sensitive, because to do that we need to do a thorough environmental impact assessment. We also look at analysis for naturalness, so we can see where target ecosystem component is not exposed for human pressure sensitive to them. And this is good for if we're looking for areas to protect, for instance. And we're looking at, an output that's very important from this analysis is the magnitude of negative impact in each area, or for each ecosystem component. How negatively impact is this one. And that's important, for instance, when we should decide how much each ecosystem component should be representative in this network that we make. It's also important, the magnitude of how affected an ecosystem component is within the area is also important for adaptive management. And Deep Sea, as I guess most of you know, is one of these frameworks to work with adaptive management. And this is in order to structure the interaction between socioeconomic activities and the environment. And we have the human drivers that makes the pressure on the ecosystems and will make changes in the ecosystem, the states, and also the impacts on ecosystem services, which in turn make us do some responses, some management responses. And if these responses goes towards the driver, it's a strong response, and if it goes towards pressures, a medium response, etc. And this framework can be used, or say that what we get out of Mosaic, but also other parts that we also use in Mosaic, can be used here in Deep Sea. So if we have a sensitivity matrix, we can look, if we want to look at a management strategy on boating, for instance, we can use the sensitivity matrices to look which pressures boating is giving. And here is one example, is resuspension. And the sensitivity matrices should also have information on which ecosystem components they are negative to. So here's the example with pike spawning grounds. So if we have the spatial distribution maps over pike spawning grounds, and we have the pattern over boating and the movement pattern of boating, we can do the analysis how a big effect this is. And if we do it before and after the management strategy, we can see if it has any good effect or not. We can also connect this to this preparatory nature value assessment, where we have stated which are the nature values connected to pike spawning grounds. So if we know how negatively or how positively pike spawning grounds are for a certain management strategy, we can also, from this preparatory nature value, see which nature values and also which ecosystem services that are affected in this. And hopefully that will give some good information for more management responses. And then we have this adaptive management. This is my last slide, but I think I need to skip it. I was just trying to summarize the targets and how we wanted to go there. Thanks you so much for your attention.